The first time my own family erased me, it happened over turkey and cranberry sauce. I was sitting at the long oak table in my daughter's dining room, the one she'd insisted on buying because it felt presidential, when I realized no one had spoken directly to me for almost 20 minutes. Forks scraped plates, wine was poured. Conversations flowed around me like I was furniture. Then my son-in-law leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth, and said it. Well, since Mom's not really involved anymore, I think we can move forward. Not involved. That was the word he chose. I am Evelyn Parker. I am 63 years old, and in that moment, surrounded by my own blood on Thanksgiving evening, I understood something chillingly clear. They had already decided who I was without asking me. Let me tell you how it got there. I married Richard Parker when I was 25. We met in Tucson, back when the desert still felt like possibility instead of heat and dust. Richard was older than me by 8 years, already established, already confident. He owned a regional construction supply company that serviced commercial developers across Arizona and New Mexico. I never worked for the company officially. That was his pride talking. But I ran the household, raised our 2 children, and spent decades listening to balance sheets and staffing problems over late-night dinners. I knew the business the way wives often do, intimately, quietly. We built a life that looked solid from the outside. Big house, annual Christmas parties, vacations we never really enjoyed because Richard was always on the phone. Our son Daniel grew up assuming the company would be his. He had Richard's confidence, but none of his patience. He married Claire Whitman, a woman with a sharp smile and an even sharper sense of entitlement. Claire never liked me. She hid it well, at first. Polite distance, controlled warmth. But there was always something behind her eyes, like she was measuring how long I would remain relevant. When Richard died, everything cracked open. It was sudden. A heart attack in his office on a Tuesday morning. One moment he was yelling about delayed shipments. The next, he was gone. The funeral was massive. Business associates, politicians, employees he barely remembered. Claire cried beautifully. Daniel held her hand like she was the one who'd lost the most. I stood there numb, hollowed out, thinking about how quiet the house would be. 2 weeks later, the will was read. Richard left me the house, the accounts, and 51% of Parker Industrial Supply. Daniel inherited the remaining shares over time, structured through a trust. Richard had been deliberate, protective. That decision would haunt him from beyond the grave. At first, Daniel acted grateful. Claire acted supportive. They told me I deserved security, that Richard loved me. But then, the meetings started. Board meetings, financial reviews, strategic planning sessions I was suddenly expected to attend, though no one seemed to want me there. Claire joined the company as Director of Operations within 6 months. She framed it as helping Daniel carry his father's legacy. What she really wanted was access. She spoke confidently, interrupted often, treated long-term managers like inconveniences. And slowly, imperceptibly, she began speaking as if the company belonged to her. I noticed when she stopped including me on emails. I noticed when decisions were discussed after they were already made. I noticed when Daniel stopped calling me for advice. By that Thanksgiving, the erasure was complete, not involved. I smiled politely at the table, excused myself, and stood alone in the guest bathroom, staring at my reflection. I was not invisible. They just thought I was. And that mistake would cost them everything. Because I was done being grateful, and I was done being quiet. Grief changes shape over time. At first, it is loud, consuming. It presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. But then it mutates into something sharper, something watchful. That was the version I lived with after Thanksgiving. I stopped asking questions out loud. I stopped pushing back in meetings. I stopped correcting Claire when she spoke over me, or Daniel when he dismissed my concerns with a tired sigh. Instead, I listened. I watched Claire carefully. She had habits, told the same stories to different people, changing details depending on who she thought mattered more. She smiled when she lied. Not a big smile, a quick tightening at the corner of her mouth. Daniel changed too. He became defensive, reactive. He spoke about growth and expansion, the way people talk when they want validation, not truth. They announced plans to expand Parker Industrial Supply into Nevada. New warehouses, new credit lines, aggressive borrowing. I asked one question at the board meeting. What happens if the market tightens? Claire answered without looking at me. That's a risk we're willing to take. We, not us. That night, I pulled Richard's old files out of the locked cabinet in the den. He kept copies of everything: contracts, notes, handwritten margins filled with concerns and reminders. One phrase appeared over and over: cash flow is oxygen. I began reviewing the financials Daniel and Claire had shared with the board. Something didn't add up. Payments routed through a consulting firm I didn't recognize. Advisory fees that seemed excessive for a company supposedly trying to expand responsibly. I asked Daniel about it over lunch. He waved it off. Strategic consultants. Claire brought them in. They're experts. What firm? He hesitated. I'll have to check. That hesitation settled into my bones. I hired a forensic accountant quietly. Not through the company. Through my personal attorney, Margaret Lowell. A woman who had seen enough family implosions to know when to ask hard questions. The findings came back in pieces. The consulting firm was newly formed. Its primary client was Parker Industrial Supply. Its secondary client was a real estate development group in Nevada, and its listed partner was Claire's brother. My stomach turned, but I did not confront them. Not yet. At Christmas, Daniel and Claire hosted. Lavish, perfectly staged. They gave speeches about legacy and vision. I gave them smiles. 2 days later, Margaret called. There's more, she said carefully. The firm Claire hired has been routing funds in a way that creates personal exposure for you as majority shareholder. Explain. If this expansion fails, you are the one legally responsible. That night, I lay awake in the house Richard and I had built together, listening to the heater kick on and off, feeling something settle into place. This was not incompetence. This was manipulation. They were positioning themselves to benefit while insulating Daniel, while leaving me holding the risk. I called Margaret back in the morning. I want to see everything, I said, and I want to understand exactly what power I still have. She was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, you have more leverage than they realize. Good, I replied, because they have no idea what they've started. And they are about to learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The first real test came sooner than I expected. Daniel called me on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice unusually upbeat. We're having an emergency executive meeting tomorrow. Claire thinks it's time to formalize the Nevada expansion. Just a rubber stamp, really. A rubber stamp. That phrase told me everything. I agreed to attend. Calmly. Pleasantly. I even thanked him for keeping me informed. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. From certainty. That night, Margaret and I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread between us like pieces of a puzzle. Bank statements, contracts, a timeline she'd drawn by hand. Claire had been careful. No single transaction was illegal on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was unmistakable. Favoritism, self-dealing, and worst of all, concealment. She didn't just want the company to grow, she wanted to control it. And she wanted me exposed if it failed. You could stop the expansion tomorrow, Margaret said. As majority shareholder, you have that authority. Not yet, I replied. She looked at me over her glasses. You're thinking bigger. I nodded. If I block them now, they'll regroup. Rewrite the story. Paint me as the obstacle. The grieving wife who doesn't understand modern business. So what's the plan? I smiled for the first time in days. We let them hang themselves. The meeting took place in the glass conference room Richard had insisted on installing years ago. He'd said transparency mattered, even when people forgot to practice it. Claire was already there when I arrived, laptop open, posture perfect. Daniel stood beside her, distracted, phone in hand. She launched into her presentation without preamble. Growth projections, market dominance, strategic partnerships. I watched the room instead of the screen. 2 longtime executives exchanged glances when Claire mentioned revenue assumptions. The CFO frowned slightly at a debt ratio slide that flashed by too quickly. I waited. When she finished, Daniel clapped his hands together. This is the future, he said proudly. We just need approval to move forward. I leaned back in my chair. I have a question. Claire smiled tightly. Of course, Evelyn. I slid a single document across the table. Can you explain this consulting agreement? Her smile faltered, just for a second. That's operational, not board level. It involves company funds and shareholder risk. That makes it my concern. Daniel looked confused. Claire reached for the paper, scanning quickly. This is standard advisory compensation. Then why is the firm owned by your brother? The room went very still. Daniel's head snapped toward her. What? Claire laughed lightly. Evelyn, you're misunderstanding. Am I? I pulled out another page. Because this shows payments routed through the firm directly into a real estate partnership you also benefit from. Daniel stood abruptly. Claire. She stared at me now, eyes sharp, calculating. You went digging. I went protecting. I replied. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Questions, raised voices, accusations. Claire denied everything outright. Daniel defended her instinctively, but the doubt had already crept in. I didn't push further. Not yet. I stood, gathered my papers, and said one thing before leaving. We will revisit this. Very soon. As I walked out, I could feel Claire's gaze burning into my back. She knew now. And desperate people make dangerous mistakes, which was exactly what I was counting on. Claire moved fast after that. Within days, she began laying groundwork. Quiet conversations, strategic lunches, casual remarks about my mental state, my age, my grief. I heard about it through people who still respected Richard's name. She's saying you're overwhelmed, that this is all too much for you. One manager told me, eyes apologetic. I thanked him and said nothing. Daniel came by the house unannounced that weekend. He looked tired, frustrated. Mom, you blindsided us, he said. I warned you, I replied calmly. You just didn't listen. Claire made a mistake, he said quickly. It wasn't malicious. Then why hide it? He rubbed his face. She didn't want to worry you. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulled out one of Richard's old notebooks, and handed it to him. Read page 37. He frowned, but did as I asked. His shoulders sagged as he read. Your father wrote that when people start hiding information, it's because they know it won't survive the light. Daniel looked up at me, eyes wet. I don't know what to do. I softened then, just a little. You tell the truth, even when it costs you. That night, Margaret called with another update. Claire has been moving assets, she said, transferring small amounts, testing limits. She thinks she still has time. Good, I replied, because I was ready to end the waiting. I called a special board meeting for the following Friday, exercised my authority formally, unmistakably. The agenda was simple. Review of fiduciary conduct. Claire arrived furious. Daniel arrived pale. I presented everything. Calmly, chronologically. No emotion, just facts. The consulting firm, the family connection, the undisclosed benefit, the exposure it created for the company and for me. The board members listened in stunned silence. Claire tried to interrupt. I shut it down. You will have time to respond. After. When I finished, the room felt heavier. The chair of the board spoke carefully. Claire, this represents a serious breach. She stood. This is a power grab, she said sharply. She's punishing me because I'm not her. Number one, I said quietly. I'm holding you accountable because you betrayed this company. Daniel looked between us, torn. I asked him one question. Did you know? He shook his head slowly. Then choose, I said. The vote was called. Claire was removed from her position, effective immediately, pending further investigation. She stared at me, eyes blazing. This isn't over. I met her gaze without flinching. You're right, I said. It was just beginning. Claire did not cry when the vote passed. That should have frightened me more than anger ever could. She gathered her things slowly, deliberately, like someone memorizing a room she intended to return to. As she passed me, she leaned close enough that only I could hear her. You think this ends with a vote? I did not answer. Daniel followed her out, calling her name, torn between loyalty and the gravity of what had just happened. The board members avoided my eyes. No one likes being reminded that power can shift. That night, I sat alone in the den, with Richard's chair empty across from me. The house felt different now, quieter, but not peaceful. I replayed the meeting again and again, wondering if I had miscalculated. Margaret called just after 10. She's lawyering up, she said. And Evelyn, there's something else. My spine stiffened. The Nevada Development Group is accelerating. They're moving fast, likely trying to lock contracts before scrutiny deepens. Meaning, if they succeed, disentangling the company will be far more expensive. I closed my eyes. Then we don't let them. The next morning, Daniel came back. He looked like he hadn't slept. She says you're trying to destroy her, he said. I'm trying to save what your father built. She swears she did nothing illegal. I gestured to the stack of documents on the table. Legality is not the same as integrity. He sank into the chair across from me. I trusted her. I know. That trust is what she counted on. He stared at the floor. She wants me to choose. I felt something break and mend at the same time. She already made that choice for you, I said gently. When she hid the truth, he nodded slowly. What do we do now? Now we finish this correctly. Margaret coordinated with an independent audit firm. The board authorized it unanimously. Once you introduce sunlight, shadows don't last long. The auditors moved in quickly. Emails were requested, access logs reviewed, payment trails mapped. Claire responded by going on the offensive. She filed a complaint alleging wrongful termination, gender discrimination, emotional distress. She painted herself as the modern executive, crushed by an outdated matriarch. The local business journal picked it up. Daniel sent me the article with a single message. I'm sorry, I did not reply. Not because I was angry, but because this was no longer personal. This was about precedent. The audit uncovered more than we expected. The consulting firm had overbilled. Inflated hours, duplicate charges, funds diverted into side ventures connected not only to Claire's brother, but to a shell company registered under a different name, Claire's maiden name. That discovery changed everything. Margaret smiled grimly when she told me. That crosses from questionable into indefensible. Good. We filed a civil claim for breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. Not quietly, cleanly, with documentation that spoke for itself. Claire's lawyer called within hours. They want to settle. Already. I considered it. Number 1, I said. Not yet. I wanted the record clear. I wanted every line traced. I wanted her to understand something she had never grasped. That I was not reacting. I was responding. And I was not alone. The escalation cost me more than I expected. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. People who had once praised my composure now whispered that I was ruthless, cold, vindictive, a widow who didn't know her place. Daniel moved out of the house he shared with Claire and into a small apartment near the office. The strain showed in the way he held his shoulders, like someone bracing for impact that never quite arrived. One evening, he sat across from me in silence. She says she loved me, he said finally. I did not answer right away. Love does not require deception, I said. It requires courage. He nodded, eyes wet. The audit concluded 6 weeks later. The findings were devastating. Claire had leveraged company resources to secure personal financial gain. She had misrepresented risks to the board. She had exposed Parker Industrial Supply to liabilities she had no authority to create. The board voted to terminate her permanently and pursue damages. She countersued. Of course she did. The legal process dragged on, but the narrative shifted. Depositions have a way of stripping polish off lies. Emails resurfaced. Inconsistencies stacked up. Claire stopped smiling. During mediation, she finally looked at me the way she never had before. Not with contempt, with fear. You're enjoying this, she accused. Number 1 replied calmly. I endured this. There is a difference. She settled 2 weeks later, paid restitution, signed a non-disclosure agreement that protected the company and prevented her from rewriting history. She disappeared from the industry quietly. Daniel filed for divorce. The house felt lighter after that. Not happier, but honest. At the next board meeting, Daniel stood and addressed everyone. I failed to protect this company, he said. I confused trust with oversight. I won't make that mistake again. He stepped down as acting CEO. Gasps rippled around the table. I nominated an interim leader, one of Richard's old managers, a steady man with no appetite for shortcuts. The vote passed. Afterward, Daniel stayed behind. I don't know who I am without her, he admitted. You will, I said. and you'll like him better. Months passed. The Nevada expansion was scaled back responsibly. Cash flow stabilized. Employees relaxed. Trust began to rebuild. On the anniversary of Richard's death, I visited the cemetery alone. I told him what had happened. Not in detail, just enough. "I did what I had to do," I said aloud. The wind moved through the trees. I felt no guilt, only resolve, because the hardest lesson I learned was this: being kind does not require being passive. And protecting your legacy sometimes means becoming the woman they never expected you to be. What came next would not be loud, but it would be permanent. And it would begin with me finally choosing myself. I thought the storm had passed. That was my second mistake. Revenge stories never move in straight lines. They curve. They double back. They wait until you lower your guard. The first sign came in the mail. A thick envelope, no return address. Inside was a formal notice from a probate attorney in Phoenix I did not recognize. The language was precise, sterile, and deeply unsettling. A petition had been filed to challenge Richard's will. I read it twice before the words truly registered. Claire was alleging undue influence. She was claiming that I had manipulated Richard in his final years, that he had been mentally compromised, that the ownership structure of Parker Industrial Supply was unfairly obtained. In other words, she was trying to erase me retroactively. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Richard and I had eaten dinner for decades, and felt a familiar cold spread through my chest. Not fear, anger, calculated, controlled, focused. Daniel arrived within an hour of my call. He was pale, jaw tight. "She's gone too far," he said. "She thinks she has nothing left to lose," I replied. "That makes her dangerous." Margaret joined us by speakerphone. "This is a long shot legally," she said. "But it's not about winning. It's about pressure. Pressure breaks people." The timing was deliberate. If Claire could muddy the legitimacy of my ownership, she could destabilize the company, frighten lenders, shake confidence. I stood up and walked to the window. "Then we don't defend," I said. "We counter." Margaret was quiet. "I want to know everything about her finances since the settlement," I continued. "Every move, every transfer. I want to know who is backing this." There was a pause. "Evelyn, that will take time. Then we use it wisely." The investigation uncovered something Claire had hidden carefully. She was nearly broke. The settlement had wiped out her liquidity. Legal fees were piling up. The Nevada group had cut ties. And the lawsuit against me was being funded by a third party, a litigation finance firm. They were gambling on chaos, which meant Claire was no longer acting out of strategy. She was acting out of desperation. That realization changed everything. The probate hearing was scheduled for early spring. The same courthouse where Richard and I had signed documents together years ago. Claire walked in that day dressed carefully, conservative, respectable. The image of the wronged woman. I wore gray. No jewelry, no armor, just truth. Her attorney painted a picture of a frail man manipulated by a controlling wife, of promises whispered in private, of isolation. Then it was my turn. I spoke plainly. I talked about Richard's habits, his routines, his clarity, his stubborn insistence on fairness. I presented letters he had written to Margaret years earlier, outlining his estate planning intentions. Then I introduced something Claire did not expect. Witnesses, longtime employees, business partners, even Daniel. He stood, voice steady. "My father trusted my mother," he said, "completely. The structure of the will was his idea, not hers." Claire did not look at him. The judge recessed early. Outside the courtroom, Claire finally spoke to me. "You'll regret this," she said. I met her eyes. "You already do." And for the first time, she looked small. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The petition was dismissed. The judge cited lack of evidence, credibility concerns, and clear documentation of Richard's intent. Claire's final move had failed publicly. That should have been the end. But closure does not always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when you finally realize the fight has drained out of you. Daniel came over that night with a bottle of wine we never opened. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't," I replied. "You live better. That's enough." The company entered a period of calm. Not excitement, stability. I attended fewer meetings. Let the interim leadership do their work. Trust rebuilt slowly, like a muscle relearning strength after injury. One afternoon, Margaret invited me to lunch. "You know you don't need to stay on the board forever," she said gently. I know, but something inside me had shifted. Power no longer felt like something I needed to cling to. It felt like something I had already proven I could carry. Around that time, Claire resurfaced briefly, not publicly. Personally, she sent a letter. No apology, no anger, just exhaustion pressed into careful sentences. She wrote that she had believed control meant safety, that she had confused ambition with worth, that she had underestimated me because she had never learned to recognize quiet strength. I folded the letter and placed it in Richard's old desk drawer. I did not respond. Some lessons don't need witnesses. That summer, Daniel finalized his divorce. He began therapy. He laughed more easily. He stopped chasing approval and started asking questions. At a 4th of July barbecue, one of the younger managers pulled me aside. "You know, you changed things here," she said. "Not just the company, the culture." I smiled. "I didn't change it. I protected it." Late one evening, I sat alone on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The desert air cooled. Cicadas hummed. I thought about the woman I had been at the start of all this, the one who swallowed words to keep peace, the one who mistook endurance for weakness. I didn't hate her, but I didn't want to be her again. What remained now was choice, and the final chapter would not be about revenge. It would be about release, about deciding what kind of power I wanted to carry forward, and what I was finally ready to leave behind. Letting go sounds simple until you actually try to do it. I told myself I was ready. I had survived the betrayal, dismantled the manipulation, protected Richard's legacy, and watched Claire remove herself from my life like a storm finally moving off the horizon. But release is not an event. It is a process. And processes have setbacks. Mine came in the form of a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. My sister, Marjorie. We had not spoken since Richard's funeral. A silence born not of hatred, but of discomfort. She never liked Richard. Thought he overshadowed me. Thought I disappeared into his life. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. I closed my eyes. "What version? The one where you destroyed your son's marriage and took over his company?" I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to explain, to justify, to soften. Instead, I said, "That's not what happened." A pause. "That's not what people are saying." "People rarely tell the truth when spectacle is more entertaining," I replied. She sighed. "You always were too quiet. No one knows what you're capable of." That sentence lingered long after the call ended. That night, I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar things. The banister Richard fixed himself. The framed photo from our anniversary in Sedona. The faint indentation on the couch where he used to sit. I realized something then. I had spent years defending my right to exist in other people's narratives. What I wanted now was to write my own. The next board meeting was routine. Budget approvals, risk assessments, quarterly forecasts. I listened more than I spoke. At the end, the interim CEO cleared his throat. "Evelyn, the board would like to discuss succession." I nodded. I had expected this. They offered me the chair role permanently. Stability, respect, recognition. I asked for time. Daniel met me in the parking lot afterward. "You don't have to do this anymore," he said gently. "I know." He hesitated. "I think I needed you to stay until I could stand on my own." I smiled. "And now, you can." That night, I drafted a letter. Not formal, not legal, just honest. I wrote about trust, about mistakes, about the cost of ignoring your instincts, about how power should be a responsibility, not a shield. I addressed it to the board and to Daniel. Then I slept better than I had in years. The following morning, I called Margaret. "I'm stepping back," I said. She didn't sound surprised. "You're choosing peace." I'm choosing alignment. There's a difference. The last decision I made as majority shareholder was also the quietest. I transferred a portion of my shares into a family trust with clear conditions, transparency requirements, oversight mechanisms, safeguards Richard would have approved of. Daniel would inherit fully one day. but only if the values stayed intact. The board accepted my resignation with grace. No drama, no speeches, just gratitude. On my final day, I cleaned out the office I had never intended to occupy for so long. There wasn't much to pack. I left Richard's photo on the shelf. That belonged to the company now, not just to me. Daniel walked me to the elevator. "I used to think strength looked like control," he said quietly. "Now I know it looks like restraint." I kissed his cheek. "Don't forget that." Life slowed after that. Mornings became quieter. Coffee on the porch, long walks through the neighborhood, volunteer work at a local mediation center, helping families navigate disputes before they turned into scars. I listened more than I spoke. Women came to me with familiar stories: being excluded, being minimized, being told they were emotional or outdated or inconvenient. I never told them what to do. I asked questions. What do you want? What are you willing to protect? What will it cost you if you stay silent? One afternoon, months later, I saw Claire again at a bookstore. She looked different, not broken, just smaller, less armored. Our eyes met briefly. She nodded. I nodded back. No words passed between us. There was nothing left to say. That night, I stood in the backyard as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. The desert air was warm, forgiving. I thought about revenge, how it is often framed as fire and spectacle and ruin. But the most lasting form of revenge I experienced was quieter. It was reclaiming my voice, refusing erasure, choosing not to become bitter, choosing not to disappear. I was not the woman I had been at that Thanksgiving table years ago, quietly shrinking while others decided my relevance. I was something steadier now, something earned. If you are hearing this and recognize yourself somewhere in my story, know this: you do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to be cruel to be just. And it is never too late to rewrite the role you were handed. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something familiar or gave you clarity, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Your story matters, and you deserve to tell it in your own voice. I thought choosing alignment would end the reckoning. Instead, it revealed the last place I still needed to be honest with myself. The call came from the nursing home in Flagstaff on a quiet Monday morning. My mother had fallen. Nothing dramatic, the nurse assured me, but they wanted family present while decisions were made. Family. The word landed differently now. I drove north through miles of desert scrub, the road stretching ahead like a held breath. My mother, Helen, had always been a woman of restraint. She believed silence was dignity and endurance was virtue. She had taught me, without ever saying it aloud, to make myself smaller so others could feel comfortable. When I arrived, she looked fragile in a way I was not prepared for. Smaller. Her hands trembled when she reached for mine. "You look tired, Evelyn," she said. I smiled. "I feel lighter." She studied me. Then, quietly, I heard about the company, about the mess. "Not the mess," I corrected. "The truth," she sighed. "You always did insist on seeing things clearly." It made people uncomfortable. I pulled a chair closer to her bed. It made me uncomfortable too. For a long time. She looked away, eyes wet. "I worried you would end up alone." I thought about that. About Richard. About Daniel. About the long path I had walked. "I am not alone," I said gently. "I just stopped confusing proximity with belonging." She squeezed my hand, weak but sincere. "I'm proud of you." The words cracked something open in my chest that had been sealed for decades. That night, in the small hotel room nearby, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. When I returned home, a letter waited in my mailbox. Not from Claire, not from a lawyer, from the company. The board had voted to rename the annual Ethics Fellowship after Richard. And me, the Parker Fellowship for Ethical Leadership. I sat on the porch holding the letter, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. This wasn't about recognition. It was about repair. At the dedication ceremony weeks later, I stood quietly at the back as younger employees spoke about integrity and courage and the power of doing the right thing when it costs you something. Daniel found me afterward. "I used to think legacy was something you left behind," he said. Now I think it's something you practice." I hugged him tightly. That night, alone again, I opened Richard's last notebook, the one I had avoided since the will reading. On the final page, written in his careful hand, was a sentence I had never seen. "If Evelyn ever has to choose between peace and truth, I hope she chooses truth. Peace will follow." I closed the book and let myself cry. Not from pain, from release. There was only one chapter left now, and it wasn't about anyone else. The last confrontation did not come with raised voices or legal filings. It came quietly, on a Sunday afternoon, when the house was filled with light and the past no longer felt heavy. Daniel came over for dinner. He brought bread from the bakery Richard used to love. We cooked together, moving easily around the kitchen, no longer stepping on old landmines. After we ate, he hesitated. "I've been thinking about selling the house," he said. I waited. Not because I was afraid, because I trusted the moment. "I don't want to erase Dad," he continued. "I just want to build something that's mine, something honest." I nodded. That's exactly what he would have wanted. He exhaled, relieved. "I was worried you'd think I was letting go too easily." "Letting go isn't forgetting," I said. "It's choosing what to carry forward." Later, after he left, I walked through the room slowly, touching walls, pausing in doorways, remembering laughter, arguments, late-night confessions, and the long, quiet stretches that had once scared me. They didn't scare me anymore. A week later, I donated Richard's desk to the company archive. I kept one drawer. Inside it, his notebooks, my letters, and the folded page from the will hearing. I began writing again, not to explain myself, to document stories of women who had been excluded, underestimated, erased. Stories that did not end in explosions, but in endurance, in clarity, in justice that arrived slowly and stayed. I shared the first essay at a local library reading. Afterward, a woman in her late 50s approached me, eyes shining. "I thought I was too old to start over," she said. I smiled. So did I. Turns out, we were both wrong. On Thanksgiving, I hosted again. Smaller table, fewer expectations, more truth. As I stood at the head of the table, glass raised, I felt no bitterness, no need to prove anything, just gratitude for surviving, for speaking, for refusing to disappear when it would have been easier to fade. If you are listening to this and recognize yourself in any part of my journey, hear this clearly. You are not too late. You are not too much. And you are not powerless just because someone else tried to make you small. The most enduring form of revenge is living with integrity after betrayal. It is standing in your truth long after others expected you to break. If this story spoke to you, if it mirrored something you've lived or something you're still carrying, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters, and it is never too late to use it.